Okay, we've got a quorum, so we're going to get started. Thank you, everyone, for coming a little later today. We've got a quorum, so we're ready to start. So I'll have Chantal call the roll, please.
Thank you. Good evening, everyone. Gregory Braille, Phil Burton, Tony Carrasco, In-Young Cho, Megan Kane,
Here.
Larry Klein, Judy Kleinberg, Patricia Lau, Adina Levin, Nadia Nayak, Keith Reckdahl, David Shin let me know he would be a little late, and Carrie Templeton.
Here.
You have a quorum present.
Thank you. Okay, we're going to start off with any items that are not on the agenda today. So can I get a show of hands of how many people want to speak to something that's not on the agenda today? Oh, I see one. And so, anybody else? Okay, you can get 2 minutes and you can just head on over to the mic in the corner. Head on over? Yep. Sorry, it's fast moving here. And just make sure you hit the button on the mic so that the cameras can hear you.
Thank you for the opportunity to speak. I wanted to bring this message again forward in that when I've heard about this project, we've talked about electrification means there'd be more frequency of trains, and everybody needs to jump on board the train and figure out what needs to happen in Palo Alto. And we have no say in the matter, except for whether we close Churchill, or except whether we do something about Charleston, or except whether we separate, and except whether we spend $200 million or $500 million or $1 billion. But actually, that's not accurate, because the frequency of trains is not dependent upon electrification. It's also not dependent upon the modernization of signal systems. Those are helpful, but not sufficient for the frequency of trains to increase. Actually, what's necessary is these expensive grade separations because of federal safety regulations that preclude the trains from going faster than 79 miles per hour unless there are these expensive grade separations. So having been presented with, you don't have a say in the matter, it actually is that we do have a say in the matter, because we may choose that we don't actually want to put in place expensive grade separations. And thus, we can make a choice whether we want to continue down this path to facilitate high-speed rail in our backyard, separating one side of our town from another. And so I guess I would put forward that we might want to look at it on that premise, because I'm sure that the city is going to be asking us to help finance these expensive grade separations and help to continue along with this dance of providing the ability to have high-speed rail, for which more funding can be attained if we provide the environment in which high-speed rail can exist. Because there's not enough funding to do the 42 remaining expensive grade separations between San Jose and San Francisco, which is approximately $8 billion in cost. And there's also not enough funding available to do the approximately $10 billion to provide the last mile from 4th and King to the Salesforce Transit Center. So.
Thank you for your comment.
Thank you.
Okay, is anybody else for public comment? Last call for something not on the agenda? Okay. So we're going to move on to the XCAP list of questions. So you do have an attachment for this? Yes, we have an attachment for this? Yeah, it's the same one from last week, or is that? Okay.
It
Yeah, so those are the comments. Okay, great. So for homework, XCAP folks had to cross off questions that they no longer, you can pass that down, no longer felt they needed to have answered. And we'll be passing around those of you who did send in responses. I think we're still missing some. So we're going to go through that list of questions to see, this is kind of to get a feel for what are the things that are still outstanding for this group. Like, what does the group really feel like they need to know to be able to start to deliberate and make decisions? And so if we need to get a speaker on a topic, or if there's certain, facts that we need to go out and get, then the point of these questions is to figure those out. So, yeah. Can you use your mic, Tony?
I was not comfortable raising someone else's question, so I didn't do it.
I think the homework was really, everyone's supposed to look at their own questions and see which questions they were willing to withdraw. It's okay if it generated a new question, but we really are trying to cut them back. And so if there's folks that didn't get a chance to do the homework but would like to kind of review now, that would be helpful. I don't know how many questions are submitted. I don't have the other copy of mine. Let me get that out for a second. Does anyone want to speak to the questions that they added or subtracted, or do we have discussion on what topics are kind of burning?
Can you clarify if, in the feedback on questions we just got, that these are the ones to keep? In other words, these are the ones to keep, or these are the ones we shouldn't keep?
Good question. Can you identify yours, Pat, because yours is the first?
Yes, mine are to keep.
Okay.
So I wasn't sure we were supposed to cross out, but as we did the traffic last time, I started with the process, and I tried to do it in chronological order. And so these are the ones that I would like to keep.
Actually, Judy, I'm noticing if you look under each person's name, so other than Pat's, I think the rest of them say, I'd like to keep this, I'd like to keep that. And then I think mine is sort of redlined, so you can see what I cut out and what I kept. That hopefully will help. So anyone who didn't get a chance to cut out their questions, could you take a look at the long list? I don't know if you have a, yeah, I need the copy of the long list to look at it. Yep, go ahead, Larry.
I just want to make sure that we're all operating under the same assumption that I am, or I will change my assumption. That is, that at the last meeting, we deleted lots and lots of the questions and left the minority of the questions to move forward, and that this is a second iteration of that. In some places, maybe the person is saying that he or she doesn't agree with the deletion of the question, but in any event, we would be considering these much smaller number to be added to the ones we're already keeping. Is that correct?
Yeah, I think the idea is to be able to cut as much as we can, but we're still keeping some.
So we've already cut out a lot of them. And I'm not sure whether I have to go back to the last week. Maybe some of these are sort of an appeal by the person who asked it and didn't like the fact that we deleted the question. Is that some of them or not? I don't know.
Was there anybody who went through and felt like there was a question that was eliminated that you didn't want to eliminate? I think we only did the traffic section, so.
Yeah, I just want to say that separately, I extracted Caltrain-related questions for presentation to Caltrain for next week.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Okay.
All right. So these are all sort of new as to whether or not we should include them or not. Correct?
Sorry, say that again?
These are not previously considered as to whether we should keep them or not.
Well, some people just say which ones to keep, and then I think a few people added, correct? I haven't had a chance to read this yet. Yeah,
Okay.
so it'll depend on whatever each one wrote. Okay, so what I think that we can go question by question, but actually I think what needs to happen is we'll have to collate these, Chantal, so we can make sense out of what's really going on. So I think I'd like to leave this as sort of what are the topics that people feel like they haven't heard about? Like, when you think about, if we had to decide next week, what are subject areas that you feel like you haven't gotten enough data on? And could you kind of clarify for me the things that we're pondering, or that your group that you represent might be pondering, that you feel would be helpful? Pat, go ahead.
For my questions, as I mentioned, these are the keeps, but the ones that I'm really concerned about, of course, are the cost. So that was under general. And then I wanted to add one question about means restriction, because the other questions really did not address means restriction in terms of a public health approach. So it's on page 2, and that's a question that I would like to add, but it's almost in the sense of education and then a question.
So I think, and I talked a little bit with Pat about this at the last meeting. As we discussed last time, in terms of noise and vibration, what we now understand is that there's a level of detail at this level of engineering that we're not really going to get. So in terms of some of the issues like, will we have fencing the whole way? We could probably make general recommendations, but there isn't answers to whether the alternative would include it, because that's something that we could recommend. But that's more very specific to the safety stuff. I can't say the same about other topics. And so, how about we take a chance to go, Carrie, I know that you're not feeling great, so I'm gonna put you on the spot and ask you if is there any topic that you're not comfortable with, or you feel like you'd like to hear more about, or whatever, and maybe we'll just go, each person could kind of talk about where they're stuck. Is that helpful?
Yeah, sure. Last week, we struck most of my questions that I had when I first joined, and that's totally fine with me. Reading through the remaining questions last week and in this list, I'm comfortable that we've covered most of it, because we can't get to the level of detail that would be for my questions that are remaining. So I'm okay. Thank you.
Greg, that you'd be next if we go around.
It's a bummer that we can't get more detail on comparative noise impacts, but I understand that we're probably not going to get that now. Most of my questions are Caltrain related. I asked the Caltrain committee a question about the 4 tracking. Are there any other efforts in Caltrain or state or county-wide to address grade separation, such as making crossings more safe by adding quad gates and things? Are there additional sources of funding, and what's going on in the Caltrain political process? I think that's really where I'm the most confused right now. It seems like we, Palo Alto, are in this completely on our own for a railroad that serves the whole peninsula, and that just seems kind of crazy. So I'd like to understand, either from the Caltrain folks or the Friends of Caltrain or somebody who's good in politics. And a related question that's still in there is, if there were a viaduct to be built, the land under it, I assume, belongs to Caltrain. So what does that mean? Would we have to buy it from them? I mean, so those are all, they're all Caltrain political related, I think.
And just going through quickly and marking the overlap between the retains that people asked, they all seem to be, almost all of them seem to be related to passing tracks and land under the viaduct and Caltrain questions.
I think we've gotten to the point now where I hope most of us understand the technical proposals well enough to understand that we're not going to get an answer to every single, we're not going to design actual grade crossings in this meeting. We're not going to decide how thick the fence is or how high the wall is or whether it's blue or green. And I think we're going to have to be okay with that. But the sort of, what is the big picture statewide and countywide and even federally? People keep mentioning things about high-speed rail, for instance. I don't think that has anything to do with this, but it keeps coming up. So I think that's where we're all a little, I'm personally feeling like I don't necessarily know exactly where we stand in the bigger picture.
I don't think I have anything to add.
I did want to point out, so Sebastian Petty from Caltrain is going to be coming to the January 22nd meeting, and so next week's meeting. Yes. And so you have, ex-cappers have in front of them a list of questions which we sent off to Sebastian today just as a primer, so that he has a sense of the kinds of questions we'll be asking. And you'll see on there that there is stuff for, Chantal just passed it out, you should get it. I'll pass you on, Megan. Oh, I have them. Let's pass those. Sorry about that. And so they have on there kind of a general covering of the questions that were already asked of the group. He can, of course, answer questions because he will be here, but I wanted to at least give him a heads up of what he'll be speaking to. And I think you'll find, because I've had several meetings with Sebastian previously, and Adina can attest to this as well, much like our grade separations conversations, there's also a lot of things that Caltrain may not have answers to because they're still going through their process, and there's some things, but it's better that you hear that from Caltrain themselves instead of hearing friends of Caltrain or me or anybody else.
Right, because
saying
we've
this.
had a lot of opportunity on the technical stuff to get to the point where, again, we're not going to know every single answer in this process. But with Caltrain, I think we need some time to understand that as well.
Right.
Yeah, based on the last comment, I think that there's a question that should be added to this list, which is about what is the relationship between the potential passing tracks in Palo Alto and high-speed rail. My understanding there is that the passing tracks in Palo Alto would only be needed at such time as high-speed rail would be serving the Peninsula corridor, and the only ones that are needed just for Caltrain are in Redwood City, but that would be good to hear directly from the agency or see if that has changed. So I think that's a good question I think that would be good to have it explicitly as a question.
Great. Also, Adina, I think you were the one who sent me the letter, and I wanted to get it to Chantal so she can pass out before the meeting next week. So there's the letter that Caltrain sent to High Speed Rail as a comment on High Speed Rail's EIR, where they basically make it clear that, hey, super excited to share the corridor with you, just so you know if you're coming around, you're going to have to pay for whatever grade separations and passing tracks you think are going to happen. So you can at least see on Caltrain letterhead that statement, which I think is important, but I realize that I have that in my files, but it's something we should distribute to XCAP so you can see it before Sebastian's
I will
meeting.
send that to Chantal right now.
Great.
Yeah, because if anything were to throw all of these plans in a tizzy, it would be a requirement to have more 4-track segments. So,
So the measurable criteria group had a list of questions, which is included in the next item. Is that something that we want to roll into this list of questions, or it's sort of a separate list?
So the Caltrain list of questions already went to Sebastian because it's just to get him ready. He's going to answer those live. So if it's Caltrain related, then we can do it.
No, not Caltrain related, just related to this,
Sure,
list
we-
we've been whittling down.
Sure, we can roll them in if it makes sense. But we're happy to do it at this part, which is question asking, or when we talk about it next, we can do it next, actually. Yeah.
Okay.
I'm realizing the other document, Chantal, that I'll give you for XCAP distribution for next week is Caltrain did a very lengthy document, which I'll send a link to, which is the organizational assessment. But page 89 of the organizational assessment describes the two entities that Caltrain, that the consultants that Caltrain has working for them have proposed to think about having a large capital projects delivery system, if you will. So basically creating a special authority that would help build the 41 remaining grade separations. And so you'll see that it's a concept, and that as far as I recall, and I'm just trying to look at Adina, but I can't see her, I don't know if the board has taken any action because I haven't been to a Caltrain, I haven't followed that closely. But I think it's still hanging out there as
On the organizational assessment, there have been some general steps that Caltrain is moving forward with, but they haven't reached specific conclusions about exactly what they're going to do with it. And that's a good question to ask, set of questions to ask Sebastian about the next steps in the organizational assessment as they relate to the concept of a grade separation authority.
Okay, yeah. But I'll make sure we distribute that to the group. So it's a very long document. I'll try to excerpt just a few pages to talk about what those two entities would look like, so you have an understanding before the next meeting, so you can read into that. That'll be helpful. Okay, Phil, did you have any?
No,
For any-
my comments in there.
Okay, Tony?
They stand alone.
Nadia, I'm not really clear. Are we taking questions out?
No, what I'm asking is, besides the questions, the homework that you've done and what we've done as a group, just right now at this moment, what are the kinds of what information do you feel is missing from this conversation that would help you get to the point of being able to think about what recommendations we want to make as a group that really are like, well, I can't really choose between a hybrid or a viaduct or a tunnel unless I know these three facts. And so I think the Caltrain conversation is a little different because people want to understand the political field. It obviously isn't going to make a difference in a trench or a tunnel, but if there's any other more specific things, then we can try to get that information so that we can start to move forward.
So I still think the 4 questions that I've asked, which is, one, what's the total time delay with each of the alternatives that are suggested during construction? The second one is, how would private property and residences feel secure and private if we build, for instance, a viaduct or a trench, and especially near Southgate on the Mariposa backyards? And the third one is, what are the construction details of various solution components? Example, a trench or a viaduct. If we can get construction sections, we'll know approximately what the private sector, which leads into the 4th question, what the private sector would cost to that. And the 4th question, I think the most important one for me, is why is the public sector cost so much higher than the private sector? Should we investigate this? Or are there better delivery systems that would cut out almost 30% from the numbers? And we can take some off or agree with them or whatever.
So I'm going to take those backwards. In terms of whether this group can investigate why public sector cost is so high, I would say we're not adding any more to our plate because we don't have time for it. If there's a subgroup of you guys who would like to go do some free research, great. But I mean, there's just no time and it's not really in our missive. In terms of the construction details, maybe, Ed, I don't know if you could talk to it a little bit. My understanding is that until we sort of decide, yes, for example, we want to go study a viaduct, they will then spend 2 years looking at exactly what the details would be, and then at that point is when we would understand more about the construction phasing and delay, and is that?
I think it's a reasonable
Microphone.
Expectation. Sure, that's a reasonable expectation as to how it will play out. There are obviously multiple variations on construction methods that will be examined as we get more deeply into the design.
Okay. And to Greg's question about noise and vibration, we talked a little about the last meeting, but it would be great to get your expertise on this. My understanding was that because engineering is so precise, like they are not really going to be able to tell you how much more noise and vibration there will be. I looked at Menlo Park's plans, and they're further ahead in terms of the work that they've done, but they don't have that level of information. But the question is, do you think it's possible that we could at least have very ballpark things of saying, yes, a trench is generally this much quieter than a tunnel, or a hybrid is this much quieter than a viaduct?
I actually don't know the answer to that question. Was that discussed with AECom and getting their perspective as to?
They've been very unwilling to say anything.
Okay.
I almost got yelled at when I asked once. Yeah.
Well, so at this point, we'll talk further with AECom as to whether there's anything else that they can provide. But I do suspect that, relatively speaking, the distinctions among the options we're talking about are not, I'll call it, distinguishable.
Let us point out, however, for the record, that all of the alternatives will eliminate train horns.
Exactly.
They're not great horses.
Except at stations.
Except at stations, which I don't know that they have to do every time, but I'd have to look that up. Okay.
Right, so my point, just to be clear, when I said they're not distinguishable from each other, as opposed to the existing condition, they're very different from the existing condition.
And then, let me see, Tony, you also,
Another mitigation point, electric MUs will be quieter than diesel haul trains.
I can attest to that.
Yeah, the only issue around that is the freight trains at night.
yeah. And I think a lot of the noise questions are really about the lifting of the freight trains. So everyone understands that the EMUs will be quieter because they're electric, but than what happens when you lift the freight, because it's a rumbly sound. It's a different sound, and I'm not a sound person, but there's a lot to that.
Are you talking about the fact that the freight locomotives will be elevated, or when they're going up a grade and need more power to go up a grade as opposed to a level track?
Yes to all of it.
Some of those questions are on our Caltrain question list.
Okay. And then, Tony, you talked about private property and how residents would feel. I mean, the residents come every week and they tell us how they feel. That might be the best we're gonna get in terms of how folks feel about things. I'm not sure what you're thinking, like what you're looking for there.
Just a cross-section of the proposed alternative compared with the backyard fence of the residents.
Oh, yeah, so you had asked for that before. Yeah, we had asked AECom for that in the technical meetings, and it was about trying to understand the distance from the fence. Remember, Tony had asked for slicing. So I would agree that that would be helpful to understand as a group, right, how close things really look as next to the fences. Yes, I'm getting a lot of nodding, so I think that would be a,
I'd asked for the minimum distance, and they weren't forthcoming with that. They weren't eager to answer that.
Ed, do you think that we can push on that?
Well, actually, I think they did answer it. Didn't they say it was 2 feet as a minimum? And there was a question of how much that would vary, and I suspect the answer is depending on the specifics of design that we may not be at, quite frankly. You know, so again, they've done rough cut conceptual engineering that has identified that 2 foot is I recall, a minimum distance shown on one of the sections. And then the specifics of how that will vary from property to property, again, will vary. And so I think that's the response we got from them on that question.
Yeah,
I think
I was asking them about Charleston Meadow area. What was the minimum there?
We have that information. It's actually a lot. But they gave us detailed plans.
They gave us
for us.
typical. I didn't see any minimum.
Okay, we should ask that then.
And when you're talking about the Churchill distance, I guess to Pat's kind of constant question is it from any structure because it's elevated, or is that like,
It was shown as the fence line, property line.
okay, so kind of in the air up
Right,
here we're talking
exactly.
about, okay.
So I've seen those plans, but I haven't seen a section.
So I think people are asking, would the viaduct protrude over the fence line of properties or stay entirely within the fence line of the right-of-way?
Understood Ed correctly, then it stays 2 feet,
The closest it gets to the fence, correct.
okay.
And I believe for Charleston and Meadow, we don't have a minimum, but they're talking about a lot more than 2 feet. The only place where there's 2 feet to anything that I'm aware of is the proposed Churchill Viaduct, right?
At the corner.
Yeah.
But my concern is they gave us typical numbers.
Right, you don't know
They
the
gave
minimum.
us typical numbers,
yes.
and what does that mean?
Right, I just don't want to alarm anybody that we're proposing 17 options that are 2 feet from people's fences.
Yes, that is correct.
Okay.
Tony, did you have anything else?
Just the last one about construction delays on traffic and sort of some thumb rule about how you measure that delay and what it costs.
I'm gonna look at you again since traffic is your thing.
Well, I don't know if, again, Gary raised it, but I would say as a rule, we do not try to monetize delay. We used to do that 30 years ago, but we concluded that that was a social engineering practice that is no longer used in the field.
Yeah, true. Can we just get the delayed time then instead of monetizing it?
Again, I'd have to defer to what Gary presented at the last meeting in terms of, aggregate delay is a number that can be calculated, but quite frankly, is not very meaningful to people. And that's the reason that traffic congestion, quantitative, qualitative descriptions are used.
So I think, Ed, at our last meeting, we talked about understanding what the delays would be in South Palo Alto for the construction of the various alternatives. So I think, Tony, if I'm understanding you correctly, what you're trying to get a feel for is, you know, how does a 7-year delay, and then like, how does, that's 7 years of traffic congestion, but are there numbers around that other than just this is 7 years and this is 2 years? Because you could have 2 very painful years, or 7 really painful years, or somewhere like 1 year is bad and others are good.
Right. And I think it's fair to say that it has not been quantified, not as a part of the current scope of work. So, you know, again, it could be quantified, whether it's, quite frankly, worth the time and money to have AECom Hexagon do that is an open question, as opposed to, again, understanding duration and that there's intensity of impact during that duration.
I would like, it's hard to see way down here, but.
I'm sorry.
No, it's okay. I thought that where Tony was going with this question, which I thought was great, it can't be quantified necessarily, but I thought it was very important for the Embarcadero and then Town and Country impact. And I keep going back to that because I thought that's where this was going. The more inconvenient it is, and it maybe not quantified, but experientially, if it's really inconvenient, people won't go. And I think the impact on that commercial district has yet to be adequately addressed, and I thought that's where this question was going. So if we could switch it around from not necessarily being quantified to being a hopefully mitigated, I mean, I'm trying to be positive on this, hopefully mitigated, but so it's not only that commercial district, but then where's all the Stanford traffic going to go to get to Stanford, if that's an inconvenient place to go? And I don't know if inconvenient's the strongest word, but we can use it. But I thought that's an important part of what your question was about, even if you can't quantify it necessarily.
Could I make an observation? I don't mean to sound like the village cynic here, but if we have too many criteria, that's just going to lead to inaction, because we have a limited number of alternatives. We have some very, very significant top-line criteria like total construction time, total construction cost, visual impact, and how are we going to trade those off against what I might call second-order impacts, like the delay on the traffic, the quantified or semi-quantified traffic delay in Alma might be a second-order impact. The noise of the alternatives, maybe that's primary, maybe not, maybe we just don't know that, because at this stage of the design, which is preliminary, we just don't know. The consultants probably could be pushed, I agree, to say typically, maybe we just need a little Larry Klein pushing.
So I think this is where we use our judgment. So,
But yes, we'll
right.
have to use our judgment.
This is our job.
Something below the surface probably is gonna have less
Yeah.
noise or more vertically focused noise than something above ground. But the fact is, we're gonna have to go on a limit some of these things.
You're totally right, and traffic during construction is one of them. If we have an option that closes Alma for 7 years, we can bring in Hexagon, and they can do a study that will tell us what's going to happen when Alma's closed for 7 years.
but
But
I
it's
don't-
probably not going to be pretty.
Yeah, but I don't know that we need to spend time, again, time is the essence. We're looking at a 2020 ballot deadline, which I'm a little nervous about. And the fact is that we can study this thing and then we don't get done till 2022, by which point all the construction costs have escalated.
So I think one thing that would be helpful,
So it's a plea for simplicity.
yes, I believe he's talking about the business tax, Judy. You want to ask?
I don't think that's on the agenda. If it is, I have a lot to say.
No, but it's not, no, it may not be my job or the job of anybody here, but somebody's got to do it.
Can we ask just a factual clarifying question? Because you made a statement that has a presumption, and those of us that are not fully up to speed with the timeline, it's not on the agenda to talk in depth about the Palo Alto business tax, but can anybody give a short factual statement about the timeline to be able to understand what Phil was talking about?
The city council has given the XCAP the assignment of making recommendations for preferred alternatives on the three crossings, Churchill, Meadow, Charleston, by April. And that timeline is driven by the desire to have as much information as can be provided in time for a November ballot.
Okay, and there isn't any other factual information about how those timelines are converging?
I'm not sure what you mean, other than an April recommendation
Yeah, is
would
needed.
enable
Would be needed,
that
yeah.
information to
Okay.
feed into the council's decision-making for a November ballot.
Cool, thanks, that clarified it.
Okay.
So I totally appreciate the comments that we're probably not going to get additional traffic studies, right, telling us about this kind of thing. But I would say that one thing that we can decide that we may not be able to have a lot more traffic studies, but we could certainly make recommendations to council that they ought to consider more detailed plans about how to, deal with mitigations for the business community or for segments of the city that might be blocked off for extended periods of time, right? So that there's kind of extra stuff. I'm reminded, our city manager had invited someone when the Alameda Corridor East project was built. One of the things that they did was, they had banners for showing that sign, showing that businesses were still open. They did sort of extra advertising to make sure that things were, people knew, like, yes, the supermarket's still open, even if it has things. So I know Judy's shaking her head, but
No,
go
and I'll
ahead.
tell you that they don't work.
Okay.
Because, and this will be as quick as possible because it's not on the agenda, but I would love to have an in-depth conversation because we're not talking about the impacts on our economic vitality. And if you're not going to talk about that, you're only talking about taking someone's driveway, which is critical. That's a critical issue, but it's not the only issue. But I will tell you that during the California Avenue upgrade and during the University Avenue upgrade, businesses just dived. And it hasn't really come back on California Avenue. I just came from their meeting this afternoon. So be careful about, and I'm not criticizing you for that because it's very normal to just say, well, we'll put up a bunch of signs and make it look pretty and do public art. It doesn't necessarily work.
Thank you. No, well, we're getting to you, so hold on. Tony, did you have anything else before we move to Keith? Okay, Keith, go ahead. And sorry, and in terms of what's on the agenda is basically us trying to figure out what we need. So I'm not trying I appreciate Adina sort of trying to cap the conversation on certain things, but we do need to get to, like, what are the things that get everyone excited? So we know, like, I now know what's the topic that you're going to want to have agendized, and we should talk about how to do that, right? But whatever it is that's got you, that gets you amped, then that's what we need to understand, because we've got to come to a point where we start to schedule meetings around some of the tougher issues, and those are what we need to bring out. So go ahead, Keith.
I mean, I think traffic during construction could be a discriminator. If we say that we cut Alma down to one lane each way, well, what's the ramifications of that? Is it just an extra 5 minutes delay, or does it paralyze the city? And we don't know right now. We're just kind of guessing. So I think that we have to have some type of at least educated guess by Hexagon to say what would happen if you went one lane each way on Alma. No, I mean during construction. Yeah.
I didn't mean to imply we shouldn't study it, but we need to be very, very judicious in the choice of issues that we take to AECom or Hexagon as opposed to ones that we look and say, these are important, and we're going to have to do a judgment call or semi-judgment call ourselves without additional consultant input. That's all I'm trying to say.
I'd like to add that I did ask Gary from Hexagon about if we did close Alma or had one lane only in each direction, how would it impact the residential streets? And he said, yes, it would be significant, and that was his response. So, if they can't use Alma, they're going to use the other, and we talked about some of those streets, and he said, well, some of them are perpendicular, some of them are parallel, but it would go into the residential streets.
Is knowing about the fact that lanes will be closed or perhaps Alma completely closed for some period insufficient to differentiate the options?
I don't know the severity. What does that mean when it's one down one lane? Is it a short delay, or is it like there's gonna be backup from here to Sunnyvale?
The other issue is, what happens if Palo Alto and Mountain View decide to do their grade steps at the same time? That makes Central Expressway a really hard place to be. But I also don't believe that we're gonna get any Hexagon study that's gonna tell us that, right? So I think the conundrum is, we're not gonna have all the answers, and then it becomes, to Phil's point, I think it comes down to sort of basic, one's for 2 years, one's for 7 years, and we don't know how bad that 7-year is versus that 2-year is, but that's the numbers that can get, and I don't know that we're gonna get a lot more, but, if the group feels like we really need to ask and push, and then that's what we can ask for.
Yeah, I think we need some data. Whether it's high fidelity or not, it's a different story, but right now, I'm not a traffic expert, and I don't know if the ramifications going down to one lane each way. But I would like to know ballpark, what does that mean?
Actually, the existing hexagon counts will give us some volumes along Alma, and it doesn't, I would be willing to take the traffic engineering manual and look at level of service issues. I think I have the skill set to do that, but I can probably tell you it's gonna be level F minus minus, without running the numbers.
I think I'm realizing there's the disconnect. So I think for Alma and Churchill, we have lots of the traffic things. What I realize we don't have is the traffic counts for Churchill and Meadow at Alma. Sorry, Charleston and Meadow at Alma. Because that was not really part of what was looked at. I don't know that those are, does anyone know? I'm staring at those of you who may.
I mean, in general, they're much higher than Churchill. I know that from the FRA data, it's something like 20,000 cars a day at Charleston, which is more than twice Churchill. But that's just from the FRA's grade crossing data. I don't know if we ever got anything from Hexagon.
But what's
Meadow is
the-
a little bit less, but it's still quite a bit. Palo Alto Avenue is tiny, by the way, compared to those, but you know.
Yeah, we have a basic graphic that I remember we were shown in the beginning, which just shows how many cars cross at each one of those. But it isn't very well, just like on Churchill, we figured out that more people are turning on Churchill to go north and south. It would be, and I know.
That we don't have.
Only from Elizabeth's presentation do I know that more people on on Charleston, go one way in the morning and the other way in the evening. But I don't know that I understand all of the other movements. And so, we could do a traffic study, but if we also took a look at it, probably we could take a better guess about if you close this, what would happen. I kind of want to put it into Waze and be like, pretend there's an accident here, Waze. Now, which way would you send me?
I mean, realistically, there's really only a couple of things that could happen. Some of the options require, quote, road closures at Meadow and Charleston. And some of the options require one lane on Alma for between 2 and 6 years. So if somebody wants to take an educated guess at what would happen if Alma was to one lane for 2 years or maybe 6 years, that might be all we need and all we can probably get.
Keith, did you have anything else?
Yeah. Neighbor impacts to the train. It was mentioned in here about daylight plane. I believe we have no control over daylight plane, but would there be any compensation for that? Would that be considered a taking? Also tiebacks. What happens if they put tiebacks if you do some type of trench and you have tiebacks in your backyard? Do you get compensated for that or not?
I think those would be really good questions that we could ask Norm Mattioni, who is the property impacts and eminent domain expert attorney who'll be coming, because he might be able to tell us about his experience with those.
Okay.
Quick answer is yes.
Okay.
You're compensated for the impact and the value of the tiebacks.
Okay.
But not for nothing about the daylight planes that we know of, or?
Well, whatever factors into the quantifiable value of the tieback itself. And again, to the extent that that had a material impact on the value of the property, that would factor into the valuation.
Okay, but the tiebacks are underground. I think what I'm asking is if you had something elevated and that made your living room darker.
Not distinguishing the two. Again, if it has an impact on the value of the
Oh, I see what
property,
you're saying.
that
Okay.
goes into the appraisal process.
And then the last one was Redwood City has a train undercrossing that isn't that old, and it's only 14 and a half feet.
14.6.
14.6. And where is 15.5? Is that required by law? Is that good best practices? And I mean, I think best practice would say you want 15.5, but if there be some reason that 14.5 would save us a bunch of money, do we have that option?
So that's something you'd like an answer to?
Yeah, if it's answerable.
Is it Caltrain? Because it's road underpass. I don't know that it's Caltrain. I think it might be more related to, can you get fire trucks through? And I'm not sure that that's Caltrain. I think that might be. So if we could ask, we'll write it
Okay.
down as one thing we can ask maybe Hexagon, must know, I'm assuming?
I mean, my sense from the questions are that much of it can be answered in a follow-up conversation with Caltrain, with AECom. And so it's a question of how you want to sequence and when you want to set that
Okay,
agenda topic.
okay. Pat?
Have any other questions right now?
Okay. Judy, your time has come. Put your mic on.
I was going to speak for Dave. I'll back you up. Go ahead.
Sorry I'm late, but I'm going to start talking about something which I think you're talking about. All right, so we're on this piece of paper on going through the sections, I assume?
Yeah, so we're going through questions, and that people turned in homework, and then part of this is also, if you didn't turn in the homework, you can do it now as we're speaking, but then also what, we're trying to flesh out what are burning topics that we don't have answers to, that XCAP members
Yeah,
feel they
okay.
really are gonna need to be able to make an ultimate decision.
Okay.
And so we're sort of taking notes on that and trying to figure out what we're missing.
Okay, so I had put two things down. The big one of the big ones is for me was any question related to how do we pull the downtown plan back into the fold, or pull Palo Alto Avenue out of that plan and get us working on it now? Because I think, to me, that intersection is critical to the overall flow of traffic around Palo Alto, and I don't see how we can get a full picture of how everything's going to be without looking at Palo Alto Avenue. I just don't see how it's going to happen. So that's the first one. And then the second one was, I know there's been requests for the viaduct in terms of getting some renderings at certain view levels, like say someone's backyard, and if their backyard was adjacent to the viaduct, what would that look like? From across Alma on the other side of the street to see what that looks like, and potentially even further back into either Old Palo Alto, Southgate, what would a train up in the sky look like many roads back? I'd love to see that.
So something beyond what was shown in the videos?
Yeah, I was looking for the presentation that was before, oh, definitely the videos. I don't remember seeing that in the videos.
Okay.
At least not in the views of the videos that I've seen.
I do
But I
remember
thought-
there's one like on the, I remember Charleston Meadow, they show it, but it's like from an intersection across, in a diagonal. So it's not a straight on. Maybe you're asking more for a straight on if you were looking up or looking across the street versus kind of down the road. Is that what you mean?
Well, imagine like if this train was right adjacent to your backyard, your back fence, and if I walked out of my back door, what would this thing look
I
like?
think I remember seeing. Yeah, I think we do have a rendering of those.
Okay,
Yeah.
so
But
if
okay,
someone could
point
send it
taken.
to me,
That's
that'd
what
be
you're-
great.
that's what you're looking for.
But
Okay.
I haven't seen it, or I don't recall seeing it.
Can I comment on Dave's? I think we need a more detailed section rather than a video, so that residents and we know exactly how far this viaduct or trench might be from fences.
So I have a question for you, Dave. Is it fair to say that the two that you really want to understand the best maybe would be the difference between a hybrid and a viaduct? Or is it for all of them? Or, I mean, in the Churchill area, there's only a viaduct, right? But I would say if you live in South Palo Alto, you might want to understand visually what the difference might be between the two. Is that accurate for everybody?
Yes.
Okay.
Not really what I was looking for, but I was just curious if a viaduct showed up at particularly Churchill, where there's been a lot of residents saying, we don't want this thing in our backyards. Well, show us what it looks like, if it's so pretty or if it's not such a problem. I'm kind of doubtful that it does look pretty, so I'd like to see it.
I'd like to speak, Dave, I think we have to rule out any discussion of Palo Alto Avenue. I think that's unfortunate, as I think you and I discussed. We probably should have had it in there right from the start, but it's way too late now. It's not part of our charge. And if we could somehow start studying it now, we might be talking about April 30th, 2021, or maybe 22. So I just think we have to rule that out. What we can do, and I think it's the most we can do, is to put in a statement in our final report that says, in effect, we wish that Palo Alto Avenue and its adjacent areas were part of this study, and it's really unfortunate that they're not.
Well, I think it's more than unfortunate, because if what we're designing as it comes north towards Palo Alto Avenue, or even whatever is happening going south from Menlo Park, if we're designing something or we are passing judgment and making recommendations on something that when it gets downtown doesn't match, or it jeopardizes options for the Palo Alto Avenue crossing, which impacts, I'm a broken record, but it impacts the neighborhoods and the economy of the downtown, then I think we aren't able to make a completely thoughtful recommendation. It's all articulated. I don't, okay, we can't go back again, but it's more than just unfortunate. It may actually jeopardize the validity of what our recommendations will be.
Well,
Just for clarity, I do want to make sure it's clear that none of the options we're talking about would have an impact that far north. And in fact, we're assuming that unless you come up with an option that actually requires reconstruction of the University Avenue train station, that you get to existing grade at that point. So the Churchill options all get to existing grade by the University Avenue station, and so would not have an impact either on downtown as currently being evaluated or for any points further north. I know there's a desire to expand it and be able to look more comprehensively at a system solution, but again, I think that the reality is that what you're suggesting is you can't make any decision until you can make all the decisions together. And that's not the assignment that the council has given this group at this point.
Yeah, I just want to, I think that's a useless discussion at this table. If you want to try to argue that before the city council to change their decision that they made more than a year ago, fine, go do it. But I think that this committee would, it's not part of our charge. And
I get that.
There are a
I
lot
get
of other
that.
things that aren't part of our charge.
I think I just wanted to be on record as saying that I didn't know the engineering point that you were making, that it can't actually, it's completely at grade by the time it gets there. But I guess I missed that in some engineering conversation. That makes me a little more comfortable, but it is an odd situation and makes me a little uncomfortable. But anyway, I'll let Dave speak to his.
I'm actually okay with your second point, previous point. It would be great for us to just put forth, look, there's some value in looking at this now and separately. The traffic is going to have to flow through there. If for some reason that gets closed, but everything else is solved, what happens to the traffic? It's going to go everywhere else. So, yeah, to kind of push back on it from our standpoint would be great.
So I have a couple of questions relating to that, and like I certainly understand the city council has given a certain charge, and I don't think it's necessarily out of bounds to say, well, like we thought about the issue and we would like to have some additions to the charge or changes based on our thinking about it in comments. I think that would be a not unreasonable thing to do. However, on the particular topic, I have a couple of, maybe a different thought, trying to say a couple of interrelated things and kind of failing here. But I think that, bringing back the downtown, which is really like looking at Palo Alto Avenue in the context of University Station and then in the context of downtown land use, in this community, a conversation of downtown land use will not be a fast one. That seems, speaking of being, thinking about the Caltrain and transportation, my concern is that by asking to put those things back together and saying, let's wait until we have gone through a community conversation about downtown land use, which is a meritorious one to have, but that could potentially run Palo Alto really scarily close to the time frame that we might have even more increased train service and not have gotten moving with some of the projects. So I think that there's a time risk on that, such that if this group was wanting to, if a few people wanted to do that, I wouldn't be comfortable with that recommendation for that reason. But also, our subgroup had some thoughts about phasing where, maybe some of the opinions, and this is Chair Nyack can explain where in our process this would be a reasonable thing to bring up the topic that came up in our subgroup, but about, like, are there phasing ideas? So let's say for Churchill, like if it makes sense for Churchill to be thought in terms of what's happening, downtown University, can that piece of the decision be considered for that later phase? Anyway, that was something that came out of one of our subgroup conversations.
Yeah, go ahead, Tony.
So, I was not suggesting that we look at land use, and I agree with Dave and Judy that we are making assumptions, slightly differ with Ed, that we are making assumptions that do constrain the options available downtown. I don't think that we can assume at this point that where the vertical location of the train station is at this point. It has to be lengthened by considerably. It has to be, the platform height has to be adjusted to the new EMUs. The issue that I'm asking is, can we look at the alignment, because it does have impacts of how Palo Alto Avenue can happen. If you keep the tracks where they are, Palo Alto Avenue has very little chance of going under those tracks and onto the other side. It's an enormous amount of disruption as well as effort to make that happen. So what we're asking is not that we look at land use. That's an enormous amount of time, and it won't get done. It's a 5-year effort, but I think the location of the tracks is not a 5-year effort. It's within our ability to do this. Let me give you one example. If you look at, if for instance we want to go up a little bit so that Palo Alto Avenue continues to go through, that would require shoe-fly tracks on the existing bridge, and that impacts where the location of the new bridge or the new tracks might go, including a station and the length.
And Palo Alto, and the Palo Alto is part of that equation.
Okay, so in terms of things, so Dave, you kicked this off, which is that, you want to understand how to pull in the Palo Alto plan. I don't think that that's possible in the process, although as Larry articulated, you certainly could go and ask counsel for that. I just wanted to refer to what Adina was talking about. So when we were talking about criteria and we were trying to understand, right now we have a binary decision at Churchill. Do we spend 300 or 400 million on a viaduct, or do we close? And a lot of the consternation around closure is that has kind of this broad set of impacts. And though I hear what City Manager Sakata is saying, that it doesn't really impact the north, I think in some ways it does, because when we initially started to talk about Palo Alto Avenue and it was removed from alternatives, Palo Alto Avenue was also being considered for closure. And so even though it's not part of our discussion, if you're looking at two that you might close, Churchill or Palo Alto Avenue, and you're making decisions only on one and not about the other, have you just precluded something? And so one of the things that we discussed in terms of how, once we start to deliberate as a group, what might we be able to say about Churchill, was to think about it as something that potentially could be phased. And, we've heard Hexagon and others say that phase one is, they would not close until they did mitigation. So phase one is actually they'd have to start mitigations. And I don't know if that means all of them or part of them, or what would that be. Phase two would be the bike ped tunnel, but as the current design that we have it right now, the bike ped tunnel is exactly where the street is. And so you'd have to close to build the bike ped tunnel. So basically the closure and the bike ped tunnel happen at the same time. We did have a while back a concept for having a bike ped tunnel at an alternate location. Steel, I think, was one of them. I remember that Kellogg was mentioned, but I don't remember if we saw drawings. And so there was a question in our group about, well, if you did mitigations first, and then second you built a bike ped tunnel so at least we know the kids are taken care of, then when you ultimately close, which depends on how bad the pain point eventually becomes, could be the third step that wouldn't necessarily have to happen all as one, and could still be debated as the downtown conversation continues. So that was kind of the conversation that our group was having. And so I guess what I want to understand is, it sounds like we might want to be able to ask, I'm going to city council on Tuesday night, and we'll talk about that afterwards. Does this group, we have the ability to take action, and one of the actions that we could take is form a question or a comment back to council about this topic. Do we feel like that is something that we want to do at this time, where we say to council, hey, look, we're trying to think ahead, and we just want you to know that we have trouble thinking about, if you make us do a closure here, how do we impact your things later? Maybe they have some feedback for us already. I don't know what the group thinks.
I would be very disappointed if considering another grade crossing meant that it takes even longer before somebody makes a decision about Meadow and Charleston. Those are our busiest grade crossings and our most dangerous grade crossings, and
My
where the
guess
traffic
is-
problems are the worst. So if we can do that without council adding another 3 years to this process,
Let me be clear, I wasn't
Yeah,
trying to say that we would
okay.
request to also work on Palo Alto Avenue. All I'm
Okay.
saying is that we have an opportunity to send a message to council to say, hey, this is something we're struggling with, just so you know. And I don't know what they do with that, but maybe they schedule a future meeting where they as a council discuss something and then come back to us to say, hey, we've decided we're going to phase this anyway, so we still want to hear what you're going to say, but this might be a slower thing, right? I don't know. Because another thing we'll eventually have to deliberate on is, when we make recommendations to council, do we make recommendations about how to stage these? I mean, let's say we decide on a viaduct in the north and a hybrid in the south. Are we saying we recommend to do them all at the same time and make our pain less? Or does it have to be phased? And if it has to be phased, do we have an order of which ones we think ought to go first based on safety or money or taxes or what have you? So,
Are we going to look at phasing? Are you saying we are, or?
no, I'm saying it was something, when we were looking at the criteria, we were trying to say that part of the trouble that we're having is that a lot of the criteria is like, well, improves east-west connectivity. Well, a closure on its surface doesn't improve east-west connectivity, but you could make the argument that now the mitigations at Embarcadero do. So it's, how do you then measure that? Because we're now measuring in a different spot, really, right? And if you don't have an understanding of how the rest of the network could be improved, how can you understand that? But it's still outside of the scope of work that we're doing.
But you're talking about the final result, not phasing, though, it wouldn't, in that comment, right?
I'm talking about just overall, if the council moved ahead with something, they would probably have to phase it in different bits.
Sure.
And so if we ultimately made that recommendation, we could go further and say, look, we would think about, you could potentially phase it, and here might be something that you do. In other words, we have a choice of what we want to do. We could just be very binary. We want a closure or we want a viaduct, period. Or we could go on and say, look, we don't want a viaduct, but if we do a closure, we have all these other concerns, and here are the recommendations we'd have about those closures. And so phasing might be one of them. I don't mean to say that that's what the group is saying. I'm just saying that that would be something to think about. And I'm trying to think about this in the context of, is there other information that we need? Do we need feedback from council to be able to move that part forward? Or are we just going to say, we're not going to know, and so when we send this back to council as a binary decision, one or two, and we say, if we agree to a closure, then, but here are all our hesitations, or here's all of our concerns, or here's what we think of the economic things, that sort of thing. Larry?
But if I can make one last comment, if we're going to go into phasing, I just want to say that the way you describe phasing at Churchill, I'm not sure I agree with, because I hadn't seen.
Oh, I'm just throwing out there.
Well, I think also it's important to note that if they move the opening, for example, of one of the options of the bike ped, you could keep Churchill open while building the bike ped.
Right.
So it's not because we haven't seen the actual designs and gone over everything and said, what's that relative to phasing? So I just wanted to point out that if we're
Okay.
going to get into that.
Right, and so that's a question, right? Like, we don't know, but we were talking about, okay, what are some of the things that we might get into, right, that we might need more feedback on? Because we have to, all of this conversation today is really for me to gauge, so that as we set up all of these meetings that we have coming up, that we make the best use of our time, and that we know what topics are the sticking points. And so if that is a sticking point, like what's happening north of Embarcadero, that is a giant question mark on the page, and we think that that's going to stop us from being able to draw a decision at Churchill, then I need to be able to flag that, so we can then, if there's information we can get from council, we get it, or so that we have a sense of how that schedule will go.
So maybe the question a question for council is whether it would be acceptable to share ideas that are related to phasing, not like not picking what the recommendation would be at this point, but to just say, should the charter include such ideas if the group agrees to them? Do you know, does that make sense?
Blair?
I think we're talking about several separate things. Phasing, to me, might very well be part of our final recommendations. And we don't have to get to it, and shouldn't get to it, until we figure out what our recommendation, in our mega recommendation is. Phasing for a aqueduct is one thing, viaduct is one thing, phasing for just closing Churchill is another, might have different results. So I don't think we ought to get off on that, because I think it's confusing the issue, which I thought was, does this group want to do something with regard to interacting with the council on Palo Alto Avenue? And I think that would be that latter is where, what I think, which they've raised and I think is on the table, and I think would be a big mistake for us to do anything along those lines, even though I think that the council made an error in excluding it in the first place, but it's too late. This gets back to the timing, and gets back to the two issues that sort of keep coming up over and over again. How much information do we need to make a reasonable decision, knowing that that number is not 100%? Are you going to feel comfortable if you have 90% of the information you need, or pick your other percentage? It's not going to be 100%. We know that. Two is timing. And this was raised earlier, and we've talked about it any number of times. April 30th was not plucked out of the sky. The first reason for it, which Ed suggested earlier, is it makes the council have the ability to put something on the ballot in 2020. If we miss 2020, the next time we can put something on the ballot is 2022 under state law, unless we want to do a special election, which will cost an extra at least $1 million. That's what the school district's hearing for its special election. For a city, it's probably closer to 2, but that's a guess on my part. But in any event, if you want to have, that's the reason number one for the April 30 deadline. The second one, which I think which we haven't really discussed very much, is, but it has come up. Ed has outlined, I think, a very good timeline as to when would our grade separations be in place, and taking into account decision making by the council, environmental impact report, negotiations with Caltrain, and who knows what else, and construction time, and drawing up plans before the construction time. And he came up with 2032. And you might play around with that, and maybe you can push it back to 2030, but the way government things usually go, maybe it's more likely 2034. Why does that matter? Because when is Caltrain's expansion going to hurt us? And that was a bunch of questions that I've had, and I think others have as well. Increasing to 6 trains per hour each way, we might very well be able to absorb the pain of increased but not incurable queues. But beyond that, maybe getting out to 2027, 28, 2030, Caltrain's expansion, particularly throughout the day, with maybe 7 trains an hour each way, would produce incurable queues. And if we don't start moving, we're not going to be ready for that, even though, so you have to look on a very long timeline here. And delays for 2 years to get the last 10% of the information that you might want in a perfect world may have a real downturn, negative effect somewhere in the late 20s. So that's why and what's the downturn of us moving ahead and not trying to get perfection out of this? I don't really see it, because I think that unless you assume that somewhere in that last 10 or 20% of information is going to be something that would really turn things around, then I think you have to say we need to move forward now. Maybe we should have moved forward earlier, but that we can't change. So I think that we ought to stay on track and not try to find new projects for us and the city council to explore.
So As I'm understanding it, then the reason for speeding this up is to get to council by April, in which case, at that point, council will then put it on the ballot, and that ballot will only have the alignment until Embarcadero, or would it have the full, it would just be Embarcadero? If not, we, then for some reason, I don't think it'll take that long to understand this Palo Alto Avenue issue. It'll take probably as much as it takes for Churchill, which is quite a lot, but it's doable. I don't see how you can. Part, yeah, exactly. Yeah. So, but the issue is how do we give an incomplete, to me, alignment that does not go all the way through Palo Alto, and how do we vote on
Let me
that?
respond. We don't know what's going to be on the ballot. Just speaking as an individual with some history of doing these things, very doubtful that a specific schematic of Embarcadero or Churchill or and Charleston and Meadow is going to be part of the ballot proposition.
If there is a ballot, I just want to clarify.
And to clarify as well, just in terms of time frame, and Mr. Shikata has shown this in the what happens after council makes a decision timeline. So in April or May, sometime, well, probably May this year is the expectation of when city council will pick preferred alternatives. There's a huge process that begins after that, which includes environmental and many other things. So that idea of what their preferred alternative is not what will go to the ballot. It's completely unrelated to that. What the conversation is about a ballot, if anything does go, is a business tax of some sort. And so these are not one-to-one in terms of what preferred alternative council picks. They're obviously connected, but that's not to say, I hope that's clarifying that. So if council says for Churchill they pick X and for Meadow Charleston they pick Y, the voters then are not agreeing or disagreeing to what council picked as preferred alternatives. So there's a whole process that has to happen after that.
Thank you for clarifying that, because I was sitting here thinking we're voting on rail separations, or we vote, okay, so let me just say for the record that if my participation here is to hurry up so that you can tax businesses for something that has never officially been linked, and I've been to every single meeting, and every time we ask, what do you want the business tax to be spent on, they never officially say it is to help pay for rail separations. However, if that's our timeline, and if we're pushing this through, which is our charter, and I don't have a problem with the charter, and I think all of these other issues about the timeline for the Caltrain electrification, safety issues, all of that, I think Charleston and Meadow are really priorities. But if the real reason, the unstated but quite clear reason, is to get this done so that we can quickly get something on the ballot to tax the businesses for something that is a general tax that is maybe going to be spent on rail separation, then my participation should not be here. So I just say that.
I'm going to kind of rein this in so we can go back to things that we need to understand. So, but I want to make it clear, the link between the two things is that the council is considering a tax. I think, yes, they've narrowed it that they're looking at a business tax. There was a point where they were also looking at property taxes, if I remember. It was always business tax, okay. But I'm not following the tax conversation very clearly. Yes, I appreciate that. But the link is simply, if they raise a tax, they will spend money on things, and there are many things in the city to spend money on. And one of the things that you have to understand is how expensive things will be. And so our process helps narrow what an alternative might be so that they have a sense of eventual costs that they might have, so that then they can think about, if they raise a tax and they decide it'll be spent on grade separations or some portion of it, and we now know the price of what those are, then we can think about how large of a tax, how long of a tax, that sort of thing. So it is not as direct as I feel like you're drawing that line, because they're right. But I'm saying, I just want to be very clear. You made it seem like you did not want to participate in something that was a sanctioning of a business tax, and I just want to make it clear that this is solely on the decision of what are the best decisions for Palo Alto in terms of grade separations. It is true that that decision will have an impact on something afterwards, but that is not part of what's happening. That is a separate, completely separate thing that we are not involved in. because I'm not.
Yeah, let me add that you can go in a lot of different ways on this, and I don't want to see us get bogged down in the tax intricacies, but I'll just throw out one. There's a difference between a general tax and a special tax. Special tax requires a two-thirds vote, a general tax only requires a majority. And which way the council will go is up to them if they decide to put a tax measure on the ballot in November, which is by no means a certainty. But we are not part of that. There's always a tendency of any committee to try to sort of expand its mission to solve all the problems of the world, or at least of the city. And we've been given one problem, or one set of problems to advise on. We're not making the final decisions, we're just advising. But there is a timeline here, as the one that Ed is, I think, pointed out, the one I'm pointing out as to when are elections possible. There's another complexity of elections, and that is other groups, the county and a nine-county area, Bay Area wide, sorry, organization is pushing the possibility of a 1-cent sales tax for the whole Bay Area to fund various transit issues. If Palo Alto, in these negotiations, I have no idea where they're going to go. The point is, though, if our people are to negotiate on these or about our own ballot measure, they need to have a preferred alternative as soon as possible so that we can get moving. Even if you talk about us using only money that's presently on the books, which is money from sales tax Measure B of a few years back, which allocated some money for Mountain View, Sunnyvale, and Palo Alto. We need to get moving so that we can get improve our negotiating position with Mountain View and Sunnyvale, which have been ahead of us so far in planning what their grade separation is going to be. Delay is always an attractive alternative. When you oppose something politically, one of the best things you can do is ask for more information and delay things, but you don't want the project in the first place. I think that the council acted wisely in saying to us, advise us by April 30th. And if we're going to do it by then, we've got to move along. That's why we have all these meetings scheduled. To bring in a major new project, I said 90 days we have left. For us to organize
Larry, I'm sorry, we're way over, so I'm gonna.
No, I don't. This is an important one. We don't have a time limit on individuals.
Right. No, it's fine.
We have a lot less than 90 days because for the council has to authorize this. You have to have AECom do whatever they have to do. Then it comes back to us, goes back to the council. So I think that when you really say Palo Alto Avenue should be looked at in some way or other, you're really asking for delay.
Okay.
Just one issue, Nadia. Just to summarize, I really don't understand how you make a decision on the whole alignment. 1/4 of the scope is removed from it. When you're making a decision on the whole scope, and 1/4 of the scope is not studied.
So, because we're over on time, but I wanted to let this go because I really wanted to get a sense of where one is. Adina, I don't think we got to you, and so I wanted to give you a chance if you have burning topics that you feel like we need to bring forward at some point.
Nope. If I am still here when we get to member updates, I'll have some things to share about regional ballot measure, but that's not this agenda item.
Okay, great.
A sort of listening to this discussion, I don't know if there's a better place to put this, but my proposal would be that we start a list of risks associated with the alternatives, because we have a list of questions, and we have our matrix. But it sounds like what we're really discussing is that there's a risk associated with not including Palo Alto Ave.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like we have a lot of risks about grade, about what Caltrain will agree to. Is that something that we should
I think we could certainly think about it. I wouldn't be opposed to it. I guess, again, I'm just trying to figure out, is there a topic or some piece of information that we're missing outside of, the council suddenly changing their direction on Palo Alto Avenue, and how would that affect everything? Okay, I think we'll, if folks you want to go over this, you now have what everybody else has changed and amended. I'm going to ask you to kind of, I will go through this with Chantal as well and with Larry, and we'll try to figure out, okay, going forward, how do we agendize meetings to make sure we are hitting on these topics, or, getting the answers in different ways, even if the answer is we don't know yet, but at least making sure that we're highlighting that. And so, yep.
And also, Mr. Shikata let me know before he left, for some of our responses related to the criteria and this, a conversation with AECom at your meeting would definitely be very useful for some of the technical questions that you're bringing up. So as we're planning the agendas, that's something that we'll be thinking about as well. But just wanted to make sure everyone had that in mind.
Okay. The audience has been super patient, so do we have anybody who has public comment specifically on the list of XCAP questions? I see, Roland, you got 2 minutes.
Right, so fasten your seatbelts. First of all, what's going on in Redwood City? I can assure you Redwood City doesn't need 4 tracks. The reason why they are volunteering 4 tracks is that they get automatic grade separations, because there's no such thing as a 4-track grade crossings. That's what's going on over there. If we put, and this is why I'm going to Atherton, and right after this, if you put in 6 tracks at Redwood Junction, we don't need anything in Redwood City, and they're $250 million where they can go around looking for something else. Nobody else is going to pay for it. If you want $250 million in Palo Alto, by all means, say welcome 4 tracks. You'll get automatic grade separation. Technical questions, all you have to do is to Google Caltrain design criteria and whatever. Caltrain design criteria fencing, you'll see the fencing down to the last bolt is ready to go to bid. The high-speed rail EIR is about to come out, probably together with their business plan. They're going to have a sealed corridor in the peninsula, which means fencing all the way and quad gates. They're not going to have impenetrable barriers, which means they'll be stuck at 110 miles an hour. Noise and vibration, high-speed 2, Arup have done fantastic job. I'm willing to, show you what they did. It shows you all the differences and everything. They've actually got simulation equipment that can do this, but this Arup, A-R-U-P, not AECom. You will not get any train horns for a train that goes to a station if the train doesn't stop and there are 4 tracks at the station. Because as long as the train doesn't go near the platforms, it doesn't have to sound its horn. Renderings, absolutely. On the project we're working on, we got the 3D model that you can rotate in any way that you want. You can see how close you're to the fencing and everything. Right now, we're in the middle of the tracks. People would rather we shifted towards Alma, absolutely. You don't need shoe flies to replace your historical bridge. We can just have a weekend closure and come in and bang in a precast box culvert in there. It'll be done. And 2020, okay, let me wrap up. 2020, the 1% state tax will not happen. It will happen in 2022. Watch out what you're doing in 2020, because Caltrain needs 1/8 of a cent sales tax.
Okay,
Thank you.
Thank you. Next, Rachel.
I'm going to make my comment relevant because I understand you have a question for City Council on the funding. And so I just wanted to point out
Actually,
that...
just to correct you, we're not including that on this section.
So the question's being removed?
Yeah.
Okay. Can I still make my comment? Okay, so my comment is, as I listen to this discussion, I'm going to look at all these beautiful matrices that you guys have provided. All of these options, I'm just going to, no mincing words, they suck. All of these options suck. The Churchill options suck. All the South Palo Alto options, in my opinion, almost all of them suck. They're terrible. Do we really want this in our community? And I think we just heard on the, a report come out that says California, even if we get to the goal on electric cars, we still have problems with emissions. We need to get more cars off the street. I just saw an article that 94301 in Palo Alto is the top California tax-paying zip code. 94301 pays $1 billion in California taxes. So that means federal taxes, they pay $4 billion just from 94301. I'm not even in 94301. I know I pay a lot. So Palo Alto is an engine for California, and I want to know what the City Council is doing. I understand we're trying to work within the constraints here that they've given us, and I feel like they've passed the ball to you, so we should not shut up on this. They need to talk to California. They need to figure out how we play into the emissions reductions and start considering holistic options. I think part of the reason these all suck is each crossing is taken independently. which is not going to improve crosstown. So you take a tunnel for just Meadow Charleston, you've got all this time you're going down, all this time you're going up, and that is not opportunity for crossing. So the crosstown is just terrible in all these options. Just wanted that to, hopefully we can talk to some representatives to try to get more money for a holistic solution.
Thank you. Next.
Rachel after Rachel. Hi, I just want to point out in the questions that you have, number 29, can we see a version of the Embarcadero mitigations that includes the approved bike ped improvements from Kingsley to El Camino? Yes, that was from 2016. It is in an electronic communication that I sent to Megan and Nadia to give to you, which also includes a lot of comments from neighborhood meetings we're having. One of them is that we would like to see a more comprehensive approach, including downtown plan.
I just wanted to make a comment about the renderings of the viaduct that I think you were asking for, Dave. It would be really good to see them. One thing that we do have are renderings of both a viaduct at the Churchill crossing and at the Charleston Meadow crossing. And if you look at them, you'll see that the one at the Charleston Meadow crossing is appears less high because it's further away from the fence. And so one question would be, what assumptions did they make when they created that rendering? How far from the fence is that? And then the second thing is, which also was mentioned just a minute ago, is that for Churchill, the current drawing is very close to the fence, and it does loom quite large. What I would like to know is if we are willing to consider moving the train closer to Alma, which would have a bunch of benefits, I think. What would it look like from there?
Thank you. I don't see anybody else. Okay, great. So our next item is item number 4, which is reviewing the evaluation criteria and determining recommendations and how to quantify and qualify criteria. Really, this is a placeholder because our meetings have been every week. We're not getting some stuff back in time from staff because they've got a lot going on, including that we've got rail coming up on the city council on the 22nd. But Chantal, I think she said you have some written updates for us, some answers. Yeah. Okay, great. So we're just going to pass those out, and rather than discuss them, I'll let us read them offline because we'll just chew up time, and then we'll kind of look at this afterwards once we've kind of reviewed what those answers are. Because I want to leave time for group updates. I'll talk to you for 2 minutes about the fact that I'm updating City Council, which you all know, and then we've got a couple of staff updates. And I did also want to make sure that we talk about the calendar going forward in terms of the meetings and the meeting times. So unless we have any objections, we're going to kind of speed through that one. Yep.
We just informally approved all the questions that are listed on.
Oh, I apologize. Good point. I moved already to the next item. I don't, it's not necessarily approved because these are what each person has individually. This was really geared towards having me understand what are the topics that we need to agendize to get answers. So this isn't a formal list of questions that we're submitting to any one thing at this point. It's making sure that then, like when Sebastian comes, if there were questions for Caltrain that are on here, that we get those answered for people. Are you thinking that this is our official question, unless we get an answer, we don't move forward?
That's what I thought we did last time.
And maybe, I heard you say at some point, Nadia, maybe this is the follow-up, that you can go through and collate to see where everyone's comments overlap.
Yeah, 'cause I
because
think
there
there's
was
a lot.
the discussion today plus the paper, so as a follow-up, potentially.
What if the group, some of these questions can be answered right off the top of somebody's head, so I don't care so much about those. But if there's a question in here that others think might take a lot of effort by the consultants, I thought our agreement was that it has to be approved by the full committee.
Okay, but I think what Chantal is saying, and I would agree, is that because we have to now collate what everyone turned in, and there wasn't enough time to do that, that we don't, unless we go through literally question by question, which we'll run out of time today, we can't, so.
So you're gonna bring it back
We
next
can,
time?
we can have it, we'll have to come back and then officially say, okay, now what are the questions, what's the final list of questions? Are there any people object to?
That's fine.
Right, is that okay with everybody? Yes, Judy?
On the topic of criteria, before you move on.
Yes, I'm sorry that I tried to move on.
No,
I was already like-
because I think we were going to be moving on real quick. Just a question. Are these criteria subject to comment by us in terms?
Sorry, so Chantal's clarifying, criteria is actually the next topic, so we'll.
Oh, I thought you weren't going to take it
Right,
up.
no, so we just need to finish the number 3, Larry's correcting me, we need to finish the XCAP question, so we're not taking any action on number 3 because we just agreed that's gonna, okay, now we can talk about the criteria, so now we'll move, and Judy, go ahead, you're asking the council criteria.
Yeah, so, well, maybe you should just set it up in terms of what our conversation is.
Sure.
Maybe I don't have a
So
question.
the council criteria was voted on at some point in September 2017, thank you for the prompt. And so this is what we've got to work with. What we were trying to do in the criteria group was try to find things in existing Palo Alto code or the comp plan or other things that could kind of give us some quantifiable numbers around this. We came up with a list of questions last week, have given those to Chantal, but it's been a quick week since we last met, so she just passed out she's going to pass out momentarily the answers that she's been able to come up with, but what I'm going to ask is that we read those offline, and we will come back to that once we've had a chance to do that. With these weekly meetings, it goes fast, so sometimes things are going to lag a bit because we just can't get the turnaround time fast enough, so.
And so, what are we going to be discussing on this topic today?
We're not really going to discuss it, we're going to move forward because.
Yeah, okay, so then I do have a question.
Sure.
Thank you. At what point, if any, can we add to, modify, clarify criteria?
So.
As a suggestion back to the city council?
Right,
because-
so the thing about the measurable criteria is if we decide that we want to make recommendations, we then have to agendize it with council. They would then futz with the criteria or tell us that they're not going to make any changes and come back, and it's going to chew up a whole lot of cycles. So what we agreed was we were going to try to work with the criteria that they gave us and look at how much we could make potentially measurable. The other thing that we sort of thought about was that if there's stuff that we think ought to have been criteria and isn't on there, and we agree as a group, then we can also decide that we want to put extra verbiage in there to say, as Megan said, for example, adding a category about risk maybe or something. And saying, hey, this is something we think you missed, and we thought it was important, and, here's what we think. Is that a fair, Adina, does that summarize what we talked about? Yes, okay. But I would say if in the meantime you think city council ought to relook at these, I welcome you on Tuesday night.
No, I'm coming into this a year after you all were looking at it, so that's why I was asking for context. But playing off of, Megan's idea, although I wouldn't use the word risk, I'd use consequences or something that's less disturbing as a word. Maybe you want to be that disturbing, I don't know. But there is a missing impact, and you know what I'm going to say. So. And so, there you go. I mean, I am a broken record. I should just pass out. But anyway, I think we'll be missing something important if we don't fold that in, so.
I will just say, and this is with not my ex-cap chair hat, but as a resident, this criteria has been something that council has meant to agendize and just hasn't come up for a very long time. So it would be, I don't think it's what the ex-cap, it's not agendized to be able to take a decision to then say something to council because that would start a whole other process. But if members of the public and certainly if the business community feels like they want to make it clear to the city council that, hey, we're looking at this thing and I see a big gaping hole and I don't know if anyone's going to do something about it, that would be something that I'd recommend, because at some point we will go back to council, and one of the things that could be added, that they could add on their own without us having to go through do we want to look at what the criteria would be? Do we want to vote on what the criteria would be? Could we add it? We have a lot of we have a lot of speakers coming to our meetings coming up, and we're just not going to have the time to do that. So you might be faster going through the front door than going through this part of the sausage making. Does that make sense?
I do think that it is unstated, but clearly part of some of those criteria. Neighbors care about the business climate. So, okay, I think I've made the point.
I completely agree. And my hope is that in the same way that AECOM kind of added engineering challenges to this matrix, even though it's not on the list of criteria, that we can sort of do the same and make it clear perhaps that we're making our final recommendation based on the actual things that are in the criteria list. And then say, you know, but our job is to provide you with all the information, so here it is.
I think that's in our purview. I mean, the council is asking us with our residents' opinion, like, what do we think? And so I don't think we have to go through the official procedure of adding it to them and their work, because frankly, they may not agree, we may not agree with the criteria. They may still come back with something that relates to business and doesn't measure what you think it ought to have measured. So I think to Megan's point, it's better that we all say, hey, we all think this ought to be a category, and we don't go through all those extra steps, because we just don't have the time. Dave?
And what if looking through this, we don't agree with the color schemes and those kind of things and the comments in there? What's the process that would not go through us then?
Do you have any thoughts on that? Because that's AECOM's coloring and.
We had a number of opportunities last
we went through
year
that.
to debate the colors. We can go back and do it again, but I know that I had a number of opportunities to debate.
Yeah, when we had Eileen guiding the CAP, remember, we went through all this stuff about.
Yeah, I mean, this is from then that period.
So this is with our feedback, believe it or not.
Well,
But it
more
was,
feedback then.
it was our feedback when we were not as official as we are now. So if you feel, yeah, it is more official now. Unless this group really felt like we really need to go fight that fight, because again, it'll chew up a lot of cycles and we got to get it in front of council, then council has to approve it and they'll come back and change all that. I'm with Megan that we kind of just take the strategy of, you know, we're parsing this out the way we want to in the report the way we want to. You know, we see your color code and darn it, we think it's a different shade of orange or a brighter shade of blue or whatever.
I'm sorry, I didn't get that last part.
I'm saying that I think rather than go through the official channels of trying to agendize, do we want to argue about color, then do we agree, then do we take it to council, that we can put qualitative statements when we do our final report about what we disagreed in terms of the way the criteria was colored or what it really means to us as Palo Altans on this committee. Is that fair? Is it? Yep.
Nadia, is there a way to score it as well as color-coded? I think we've gone into a finer grain than just colors.
So we had
it's the yellow versus.
We had a lot of debate about this on the measurable, on the criteria that was trying to make things very measurable. And what we agreed to is that the problem about scoring is then we have to come back to this group and we have to have 13 of us arguing about whether we think something should be worth 5 points or 2 points and how you would add that together. And so in the end, what we agreed is we want to take things that are already measured in the normal course of business. Like, for example, there's already a noise ordinance that says if you do construction and you go above certain decibel levels, you have to do all these sound mitigations to protect against that. And use existing code, so we're not reinventing the wheel, and we're not chewing up time arguing about whether noise should be 5 points and visual should be 7 or whatever, because we'll just get bogged down in process and not get into the meat of the stuff, which is like, really, you can assign a number to a viaduct or a trench or a tunnel, but at the end of the day, like, you gotta pick one, and I'm not sure that, I think for most of us, this is a much more deep experience that isn't going to be driven by what the number ended up being.
What if some of these numbers could have changed given current data?
What do you mean by that?
So the one I'm concerned about is row A.
Sorry, I don't have the sheet today, so if you could just.
It's in the memorandum.
Thank you. Sorry.
Yeah. So row A, enclosure for Churchill.
Facilitate movement across.
Okay.
Yeah, facilitate movement across the corridor. Yep. Then, this is not colored here, but I believe it was kind of like an orange for Churchill Avenue will be closed to vehicles at railroad tracks. And so I guess the issue here would be that the selection of this color was probably made before that information we have about Embarcadero mitigations. And so the closure option is not just about the fact that we close Churchill. Of course, yeah, that means there's no traffic can go through it, but it's the option is closure plus mitigations, and so therefore that combination should you lead that to be, yeah, Churchill's closed, but the vehicles should, according to the latest hexagon report, that traffic is moving satisfactorily through the mitigations.
So I will just go back to, I don't think we have time in the XCAP schedule to agendize going through colors, but again, this criteria was done in September of 2017. And I will just say that I don't even remember what the alternatives were on the table at the time that this criteria was created. So I don't think it imagined that the two options at Churchill, for example, might be closure and a viaduct, and what would be the best criteria to distinguish between those two. So what I would encourage you is to show up in public comment on Tuesday night and make the point to council that, hey, we're working with this old criteria. I don't know if you've looked at it in a while, but some of this is hard to apply. But I don't think that we can, as a committee, take up time to do that because we'll be here forever. And, you know, I know you guys love being here for 3-hour meetings each week, but, you know, I'm sensitive to the fact that people are working and this is taking a lot of time. And so I just think that we've got to move forward. And I will also say, for me personally, you know, whether that box is orange or blue isn't going to help me decide. I'm going to decide what those mean. I mean, I can see the colors. It's helpful for people who aren't as familiar, but I think we know these well enough that if you don't think that should be orange, it should be a different color. That's going to be reflected in the way you think about what the answer ought to be. And I think that that's true for each of us. And so I'm not so concerned about the colors. Does that make sense to everybody? Does that seem appropriate given the time constraints? Okay. All right, we're not really going to, we'll bring this back again once we have a chance to read through it. Do we have any public comment on? Oh, sorry, I thought you had passed it out. I wasn't.
No, I wanted to make sure I didn't interrupt. So before I pass this around, I wanted to capture a message Mr. Shikata told me. Is he's sorry for having to leave a little bit earlier. He had another commitment that was already scheduled before we changed the meeting to 5 to 7. And he also said he was sharing information today, but he wasn't trying to be snarky, so he apologizes if anything came off that way. So, apology show. Okay, on
Well,
to the,
excuse me, before we move on this, just one last question. On the back page of this item, the first question was about funding.
Yeah, we actually
And I thought
removed
we
that.
removed
We
that.
did remove that.
So it
yeah.
shouldn't be here.
It should not be here.
Thank
Yep.
you.
yeah, and so this document too, I just copied what was given last time, but and what I'm about to pass out is staff's initial responses, and I did do a strike through for that first question.
Perfect, thank you. So homework is for everyone to read this.
And yeah, for context too, because your last meeting was 1 week ago today, so full context, this is pretty quick and dirty. But it is staff working with AECom trying to just give some of the high-level responses to your questions about the criteria and if any, oh, sorry, there's another one in case you need it. Okay. Some of the criteria related to pumping, et cetera, and we can follow up. And again, like I mentioned, a conversation with AECom could also provide some good follow-up for us on this.
And just from my perspective, these kinds of documents and any other further refinement that we get is the kind of stuff that I envision would eventually be in the appendix of a report, so that future people who go back and read our reports know what we are basing our information on. And just one more thing about homework. So this is part of your homework, but the other part of the homework is we need everyone. We had a good traffic conversation the last meeting, and I know it was only a week ago, but we really need to get a good list of additional traffic questions and concerns that we have to Hexagon. So everyone should turn that in, and I think to speed things up, if it's okay, they can send it to you and copy me, right? So we don't have to do the Google Doc thing. So everyone, when you send your questions to Chantal, also please copy me. And that's really just to help me, so then when I chair the next Hexagon meeting, I know kind of where the spots that you guys are stuck on. Okay, so, Philip, sorry, I can barely see you down there.
Sorry, I just have one staff update. I was hoping to catch Adina, but the Caltrain electrification, they'll be holding a community meeting on January 28th from 6 to 7 p.m. at the Rinconada Library, and they've shared that information with us, so I wanted to share with you all.
Great, thank you. And I did make the point, so just so XCAP folks are aware, when you talk to your networks, that meeting is not, it's just a few days before we start having word on the street and town hall meetings and whatnot. And so important for us to be making sure that people don't all show up at the Caltrain electrification meeting asking questions about the closure of Churchill, because they're not going to get an answer and they'll be very confused. So if to the extent that we distribute this information to our networks, be very clear that the Caltrain is like a Caltrain-only party, and they're not going to want to talk about our party. So, anything else before I turn it to public comment? Okay, Roland, I think you're the only speaker.
Yeah, so very briefly, obviously, I'm concerned about this AECOM information here. especially the engineering challenges, which I believe we've addressed. So the question is, what is the opportunity of putting the alternative here and showing what the alternative brings to the table? Because quite frankly, that's why we got involved in that in the first place, including cost, not maybe 300 million instead of $1.5 billion. The other thing is, I don't know, it pertains to this, but these community meetings that you're going to have, is there an opportunity to have a table to show the alternatives, to have videos, showing the model in 3D animation, somebody saying, my backyard is here, what can you do, and doing that kind of stuff. So that's a question out there. I'd appreciate an answer, probably offline. Thank you.
Thank you. Oh, we've got one more speaker. Go ahead.
Excuse me, I've been trying to figure out where the proper place to ask this question is, but when this criteria was handed out, could you clarify for me, and others I'm sure, are the two options at Churchill is either closure or a full viaduct, or any other, if it was a lower viaduct and the street dropped a little bit, and then we'd be back to a hybrid, but it seems like there's been a lot of comments about Churchill, a lot of concern about Churchill, and it seems to me that needs further attention.
The hybrid was actually studied and eliminated, and because it would have had too many property impacts to access driveways. You can find that on the website.
Okay, thank you. And that raises another question. When I was thinking about other questions to be submitted, I'm out of sequence here, but I'm not sure there are enough questions on there about acquisition of property. And as was pointed out at one of the earlier meetings, maybe we shouldn't be calling it eminent domain. It should be acquisition of property.
Thank you. I'll just clarify from my perspective, I always like to use property impacts because sometimes it's acquisition, sometimes, it all falls into the bucket of eminent domain, but a lot of people don't understand eminent domain, so I personally always try to use impacts. But we will be hearing from Norm Mattioni, as an attorney, who will be coming to the next meeting, so part of the reason there aren't as many there is because we have a separate list of questions that we're sending to the attorney.
Next meeting is Caltrain, right?
The next meeting is Caltrain, yes. Yes, Sebastian Petty, yes. No, 21st, next week.
22nd.
Yeah.
Yeah, and for clarification, Sebastian Petty for Caltrain is the business plan, and he'll have another staff person that can probably speak to some of the engineering pieces of it. But there was a third bucket of Caltrain questions you guys had, and he probably wouldn't be able to speak to those.
Okay, and sorry, just to correct myself, I am updating council on the 21st. This XCAP meeting where Caltrain is speaking is the 22nd. So, sorry, I've got a lot of dates going in my head here.
4 o'clock or 5 o'clock?
That's at 4. There, yeah, so we should talk about the dates. That's actually the next thing. So we're gonna do member updates and working group updates, but I also want to make sure before anybody else has to leave that we talk about the calendar. So in order to be able to make our deadline, we've got to sort of hit all of our meetings. And that means really trying to meet as frequently as we can. And I recognize that that's cumbersome, and I'm hoping that not each of them are 3-hour meetings. Obviously, when we invite speakers, we'll certainly allot as much time as we need so that we can make sure that we get our questions answered. But yes, as of right now, we have to have a meeting on the 21st and then again on the 29th because we have, 22nd, darn it. I'll get it right, I promise. And then I believe I just got an email a little while ago. I think Norm Mattioni is looking at February 5th, Chantal, so. Yep. Anything else, Larry? Okay. So yes, for now it'll be weekly. Chantal sent around that list of all of the dates. We do have a break for the week that is the same week as PAUSD's winter ski week for those that have kids. There's a question about the spring break. As we get closer, because that'll be April and it'll be really crunch time. Unless something happens to our schedule before then. And I just want to point out that.
And it's not actually a ski week, it's a long weekend, but just, I sent Chantal an email.
Which one?
It's not a whole week, it's a long weekend. I sent Chantal an email. We'll do the best we can.
And I'm not sure every school does it the same. I have to, because. Yeah. So yes, so to answer the calendar questions, that's where we are. They all start at 4. Yeah.
So today was the only exception?
Today was an exception if we need to make some based on speakers, or if there's sort of a consensus for other days, we can look at that going forward. And if you have specific dates that you're like, wow, this day for 5 o'clock would be much better for me, that works. Just let me know. But try to let me know way in advance, because we've got to work on agendas and scheduling people.
It would be helpful to know in what month we think we're going to be getting to, like, making the real decisions.
So I think.
Because I can't promise I'm not going to travel on business until May.
It's okay. So honestly, it's going to be pretty quick. I mean, I think after we have the property person come, or the Norm Mattioni come, I think that's when we're going to start to be like, okay, this week, Churchill, let's go. And because we've got to really understand, okay, what are we coming back to? Where are we getting stuck? And frankly, there's going to be some portion of the time which is figuring out exactly what we want the report to have in it, right? And that is, so decisions in some ways are happening even before April, because
Yeah.
April is really then making the sausage and having the final report and making sure that we've got everything.
And we need to know how far we are from consensus on each of these alternatives.
Right, and part of the reason that I let the discussion really go today was to kind of feel out, okay, like, where are we on what we're stuck on, right? And, because clearly I heard a lot of there's folks uncomfortable about certain things, and so that helps me with the calendar, so.
Okay.
If you have, obviously, anybody who has any major trips that are coming up that I need to know about, and there's a meeting that you're like, you know what, when this person comes, I really don't want to miss that, or can you know that this is happening, that would be helpful to understand.
I'll be out of the country, out of the country in May.
Phil, I'll ask you to email me, because I know Larry's also leaving at some point, and so we've got that, but, yeah. May, our deadline is is April 30th, I will just note it. That sounded terrible. Judy, go ahead.
So I had reviewed these dates and had composed an email to you and was waiting for this conversation. I'm going to miss half of these meetings.
Okay.
Because of personal vacation, business travel, and the fact that, and these were planned way long time ago.
Totally understand.
And that's not even counting getting sick because of Carrie, but anyway. I was going to say that it's very hard, it was hard to just even catch up. And it's very hard to go forward when you have these really robust conversations, which are great. I mean, we're really provoking each other, which is what it's all about. But it's very hard to come in after two, for example, in February, I would miss 2 of the 3 meetings, right, like that. And the additional thing is that the Chamber of Commerce, the way we conduct our business is because business is doing their business during the day. We conduct late afternoon expos and mixers and committee meetings. I mean, that's the nature of the way the chamber operates. And so while I was able to carve out a lot of these meetings and have other staff handle those, and I'm going to be missing some pretty critical things already, I already see how many of these meetings I would be missing, and it concerns me a lot because although Tony's a businessman and there's other business people here, but it concerns me because I've made a commitment, but now I know I can't meet that commitment if this is the schedule. And I don't know how to resolve that, and I'm not asking for a whole conversation right now, but I thought I would, I can email you what I can read it, or I can email you what I already drafted, because I was concerned about this.
Thank you for letting us know. Why don't you can email us offline, and certainly make sure you copy Chantal and Ed as well. And then what I would say also is perhaps as we get going, if I have an understanding of topics where you're like, wow, that one is one I really want to be there, then we might be able to be like, okay, we're not really going to talk about this one thing because we really have to wait for Judy on this issue because this is one that she really cares about. And we can't do this on all, but.
I would suggest, as nice as that offer is, that don't go down. That's a slippery slope. This
Okay.
group wants to move ahead. You have to move ahead. I'll talk to you and Larry and Ed about what might, and Chantal, sorry, you're not getting off the hook, but about what accommodation might, not slowing anything down for me, but.
Would later meetings work better? Is that what you're?
Oh, I'll get divorced.
Sort of relatedly, though, since we're having meetings every week, could we get the videos at least? I know that sometimes they're on YouTube, but they're not on the website yet.
The fastest I can get them from the media center is 3 days after the meeting and accounting for weekends, et cetera. So for example, last week's meeting, I think just was uploaded a little bit faster, so then
Yeah.
I link to it, but if
Cool.
it's not on the MidPen site, I don't have a link to
My,
it at all.
my suggestion is if you do have Comcast and you have a VCR, DVR, well, it's very 1980s. Everyone set your VCRs. You can automatically set them to all record, and so then they're instant. You have them like hours after they
Wait,
just
are we on
happened.
TV?
Yes, we're on TV.
I did not know that.
Smile. Right, but we all live in Palo Alto. No, we don't. Oh, well, okay. Sorry, Judy. No, but I just mean for ex-cappers who are missing a meeting and want to catch up faster.
Are the notes posted more quickly? I haven't been reading them, but I'm going to miss a few.
I'm
and
working
gonna-
on them.
Okay. Okay, TiVo to the rescue. Got it.
But if you do see videos missing, let me know. I do try to look at it when I'm posting upcoming agendas, so if a video link is missing, just let me know and I can reach out to MidPen.
Okay. If it's okay with the group, because we're running out of time, and I do want to make sure we talk briefly about the council update. If there's member updates and working group updates, can we do those via email? Feel free to send something to Chantal. She'll blast the group, and that way it'll go a little bit faster. I know, I think Adina had attended a team meeting, and she wanted to talk about that. We can send out the thing that we had talked about, Megan, in an update via email, but that'll save us some time there. So the next thing is, you, ex-cappers only, you have a draft, very rough draft copy of the presentation that I will be giving to City Council with Keith on Tuesday night, because Monday is a holiday. And it is a summary of each of the three new alternatives, with a little bit of, setting the stage of, just so they remember, these are the existing alternatives and how much they are. Chantal sent over a couple of, or several great edits. Keith and I will be working hard on this again tonight, because it is due by 9 a.m. tomorrow morning, so that it can get printed in the packet. But I will be just doing the very fast intro in the beginning, and Keith has been nice enough to use his very slow and methodical and engineering voice to be able to articulate the three new concepts. And then the people who propose the concepts will, Tony and Elizabeth and Mike will be at the meeting to answer any council questions. And of course, just to remind everybody, the council will be then making the decision on whether they want to spend any money considering these alternatives. And I will just note that one of my outstanding questions, I know that the city staff, the city will also be doing a staff report on these alternatives, which I believe will, Chantal, you can speak to what is in it, or what will be in it, since it comes tomorrow. But one of the things that, in terms of the schedule, to understand is that if the council were to vote on a new alternative and they agreed to study it, that may impact our schedule. And what does that mean for how many more meetings and when? Because it's going to be really hard for us to deliberate if we have one extra new alternative that we might have to wait 2 months to get the science back on, or the data back on. So stay tuned. And everybody's, of course, encouraged to come on Tuesday night if you'd like. And please make sure that your neighbors know that these items are being discussed. So Chantal, did you want to talk about what's going to be in the staff report?
Sure, it's some of the recap on some of the communications things that we've talked about, an updated flyer, which you guys, I think I linked to it for you. And then also the AECOM analysis about the three new ideas as of what was presented to the XCAP. So for Elizabeth's concept, I know that hers will be a little bit different, because it continues to shift to be
refined.
Yes, that. So it'll be some analysis on that, and then just general updates from staff.
And it's also going to have a cost estimate for council about how much it'll cost to study each alternative, correct?
Correct. Estimate it. And so we would have to see what council chooses to do in order to know the exact amount for each of the ideas. But in terms of all the study that would be needed, it's just based off what council decides. But we just are giving some high level.
And would it also tell us how long it might take them to pursue? Because some ideas might take longer than others, and so will the staff report include, like, we think it'll cost, this much money to study Elizabeth's idea, but, it'll take this many months, or?
It probably won't be that granular.
Okay.
So it'll just be saying whatever the council is deciding, staff will need to go back and do further analysis to make sure that we know what they're asking for, and then we can give the cost estimate and the schedule implications for that.
So are you saying that you're going to present it to council such that they should then tell you, well, we're interested, but we still need you to come back with more detail? Or will they have enough detail to make the decision on Tuesday?
Council can decide what they want to do based off your presentation. So that's really how it's framed.
Okay.
And then we're just saying, once we know what that is, then we can try to tell you exactly all the details of what that'll cost, contract amendments, any of those type of things. Because we just don't know that at this time.
Okay.
So I would urge council not to speed this thing up so fast that we decrease quality. I think that the issue of bringing it before they get to the agendizing the business license tax is sort of artificial. And I think that we should do our job well and take the time it takes to do it well, especially because construction is in 2038. We have plenty of time.
So please come and speak at council. Okay, do we have any public comment on my update to city council? Oh, sorry, do we have any public comment for my update to city council? No, okay, great. Chantal, do you have anything for us?
I think we covered everything through the different items. Philip? Okay.
Okay, great. So again, as a reminder, I will be at city council. I think it's 8 p.m. is the very estimated time.
I don't have it in front of me.
I think it was 8 p.m.
Whatever I told you before.
Yes, so more or less 8 p.m. And for those of you who've not been to city council before, you should know that you should watch on either on TV or listen on the radio because it can fluctuate. And then on the 22nd, our next week's meeting, we will have Caltrain, so be ready with your questions. So thank you. With that, we're adjourned.